Hi there, and welcome back to the Smart English Coach podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Maurice Jetz. Now, Maurice is an experienced English teacher who has personally learned 7 languages. So, Maurice understands the power of personalized feedback in building confidence and fluency. Morris specializes in teaching English at A2 and intermediate level, and he uses a voice chat method that fits into busy work schedules. So, welcome, Morris, and thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much, Claire, to have me on. I'm excited about this.
Well, I am amazed that anyone actually can speak 7 languages. So I'd be really interested in finding out more about your history as a language learner. So perhaps you
Mm.
can tell us something about this. What's your first language to start with?
Okay, so my native tongue is Dutch. That is the
Perfect.
language I grew up with. I grew up in the Netherlands, so that is the language we speak, and that's where everything started.
Okay, so tell us then about how these 7 languages happened. You started off with Dutch. What was your next language?
Okay, so in the Netherlands, the education system includes a few languages. This is just a part of our history because the Netherlands is a small country and we're all connected business-wise to all the countries that surround us. Um, so we learn German, we learn French. So these were the languages that came next, English and French. Um, and then also German. So these 3 languages were added to my, let's say, portfolio since the beginning as a child. So that's where it got started. And later I got interested in Spanish. I just loved that language because of what was behind that language, the culture of the Latinos, of Spain, the beautiful climate, everything connected to that. And then when I was 33, 34 years old, I decided to make a big step and move to Brazil. That was in phases, obviously, but I ended up staying in Brazil for quite a long time. And Portuguese is the language spoken in Brazil. And in Brazil, I participated in a humanitarian project where Haitian Creole was a language that was important. So I decided to learn that language too. And so that's how I got in a nutshell, how I got to speaking seven languages. Yeah, can't
Wow.
even believe it myself. But yeah, that's how it kind of went.
Wow, that is amazing. And I love the way that you've kind of divided the languages as well. So the first languages you learned were because you had to, because they were part of the school curriculum. And obviously, so Dutch is
Hmm.
your first language, but then English, French, and German were languages that you had to learn at school. So that's already
Hmm.
4. But after that comes your passion for not just the languages, but also the culture, as you mentioned. So you were really interested in Spanish culture. And then after that, because of your professional life, you then ended up learning Brazilian Portuguese and Haitian Creole.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. And do you use all 7 of these languages on a daily basis now, Morris?
Okay, so at this moment I don't use Spanish that much, but the language, and I don't use Haitian Creole that much at this very moment. But the other languages I do use them every day because most of my students are based in Switzerland, France, the Netherlands, and in Brazil. So that that includes all those languages. And something that I really, really enjoyed since the beginning, and that is something that I later on also kind of reconnected with when I started to actually teach various languages, including English, is the connection with the coach, with the teacher, because I had wonderful teachers who I connected with as a person, but also who brought in a great amount of humor and fun, and so there was no apprehension for me to learn a language, and I think that was a good starting point. And that because you said, I had to learn those languages, but it was true because it was part of the school curriculum. But for me, it was never something that I felt was mandatory in any kind. but something that I just highly enjoyed. So that was how I looked at languages. What was my first experience with languages, with the people who taught me those languages, but also how, we experienced the learning process.
Yeah, that's a really nice point, actually. You say, having that connection with your teacher makes it a more joyful, fun, humorous experience than feeling that you have to learn it because it's on the curriculum and, you've got
Mhm.
homework or tests and you're not really enjoying it so much. Um, I'm going to go ask you some questions about your experience of learning and teaching in just a minute, but
Mhm.
I had one question for you. Of all these seven languages that you can speak, and actually we won't count Dutch in this, so of the six foreign languages, which language do you think was the most difficult for you to learn? And could you say why that was?
Oh, that was obviously French. It took
Ah,
me ages to learn French to actually get to a decent level, because maybe there was just an amount of uncomfortableness involved in learning that language, where a lot of elements were just not there. For example, I didn't have a speaking environment that was so dominantly around me, so that was a problem.
mm,
Also, the culture behind French, it doesn't really help you to learn killing the apprehension. It actually increases the apprehension,
mm,
because just to give you an example, I remember I was in France. I started to travel to France very young, at the age of 16, just by myself. And it's just like I'm kind of person that just jumps in and starts to work with what I have and improvises on that. But I remember there was a lady who told me when I was asking for directions, um, I'm sorry, I would like to discontinue my conversation with you because your French is so rubbish. Have a good day. And I couldn't believe what I heard, but I couldn't also stop laughing because I couldn't believe that actually, this was really happening. So it didn't really affect me, but just to emphasize the fact that, certain languages are connected to cultures that really not necessarily are a big help, as far as embracing you as a language learner, helping you to progress and to make steps in your, let's say, platform progress. So French was definitely it took a while for my brain to get conditioned to actually listening to the language, and also establishing those neural pathways into actually speaking and engaging in the language.
I mean, that is such an incredible experience. Well, incredible in the wow, did that happen? From that perspective, I can't imagine someone sort of telling you off, criticizing you to such an extent that they
Mhm.
don't want to even engage with you. That's quite a punitive approach, isn't it? So that would have been a
Quite
very big,
brutal.
very
Yes.
brutal. Yes, I mean, it might have been honest, but it was certainly brutal.
Mhm.
Wow. And I love the way that you said that with language learning and with speaking a language, you sort of improvise, you go with what you've got. And I love that because I think a lot of the time we do need to do that. We do need to think, well, actually, I don't have all the grammar knowledge, I don't have all the vocabulary, but I will work with what I have got. And I think that's a really good methods for extending your English, your well, all languages, but obviously we're talking about English learning here.
Mhm.
Perhaps you could talk about other methods that worked for you in terms of fluency. So you've mentioned that you like to get on well with your teacher, you like to establish a connection, that you are someone who improvises with language. Are there other methods, Maurice, that really worked with you?
Oh, definitely. And I can tell a small anecdote how that works for me. For example, in Brazil, when I was learning Brazilian Portuguese, because when I got to Brazil, I only knew one word, and that was thank you in Portuguese. That would be obrigado, and that's all I knew. And that wouldn't scare me at all, but I thought, okay, let me use a very efficient method that I always used with other languages. I was helping friends with an event where people were kind of invited for the event, like on the street. So I would figure out a few sentences and just write it down, like, I would like to invite you for this wonderful event. It's then and then. And so I went out on the street, that little paper in my pocket, and I would just like repeat that sentence to a bunch of people all the time. And I would do it like 30, 40 times. And then I noticed that in my brain, I was kind of getting used to this sentence. It was just part of my system now. I didn't need the paper anymore, like a cheat sheet. So from the moment I started to feel comfortable with that, what did I do? I started to build on that, just add something to that, just something small, another sentence or a word or just an expression or whatever. And then bit by bit, I saw myself within a week, within a couple of weeks' time, I saw myself actually starting to engage in a simple conversation with the person. And so, and this is what I mean when I talk about the uncomfortableness, looking for the uncomfortable, because it is an environment that you need to progress and to get more fluency. You cannot just look at a book or just put it under your pillow and then the magic is going to happen. You need to go out there and you know repeat a couple of things and then bit by bit you know increase on what you know. And that is my method as a learner, but also as a teacher to speak what you learn. That's always what I say. Speak what you learn. It doesn't need to be much, but what you do know, you need to be able to speak that. And once you have that, that is something that you can build on. And I think that will establish a base that, you know, little by little you'll be able to grow and to bring to real fluency. That makes
Lovely.
sense?
Thank you. And as you mentioned, being using repetition to do that. So
Mm.
you start with something, get comfortable with it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, and then little by little add bits on. So you're either practicing something or learning something new, and the new things always get practiced. And I think that's really important. Sometimes I think we underestimate how often we need to practice new things for them to become
Mm.
part of our knowledge. And as you say, you start with the cheat sheets with your little sentences, and once you have mastered those, then you move on to something else. Lovely. And are there other ways that you used to master English, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah. For example, something that I use a lot is using recordings.
Mm,
Because, and this is another uncomfortable thing, because who loves to listen to his
mm,
own voice? It's a terrible thing. But I noticed that by doing that, for example, with French, when I thought that I was quite fluent, that I wasn't making so many mistakes anymore, actually listening to my recording, it made a huge difference. And actually, you know, get back with my feet on earth, you know, to like, there's still actually something to work on seriously. And but not just for myself, also, you know, to have someone capable to give you honest feedback based on a recording you make, um, that is something that is very, very effective.
yeah.
Also, what I use is a timer. For example, when I read something or when I say a sentence or when I like enumerate a number of things in the language, then in the beginning we tend to, you know, to say it our way, like word for word, but we don't really manage to put the words together in an expression of thoughts or feelings. So you kind of need to speed up a little bit. So what I do is just record in time how, you know, how long it takes for me to say all I need to say. And then let's say if it's a minute, I'm going to give myself a new time target. Let's say I used a minute. Now I'm going to try to say all of that in 40 seconds. And so I kind of need to speed up, but by repetition doing that, you're definitely going to increase your speed, because you know your tongue is a muscle and needs to, you know, repeat the exercise to get more loose, to become more comfortable by saying things without losing the articulation. So using a timer and recording is a very good technique that has immediate effect if you use it frequently. Something else that I use is sentence generators that use a lot of that with learning Spanish and also Haitian Creole. Standard sentences that you can use to say a million things. So if you know in the beginning, for example, if you know 5 sentence generators, um, you can say that for basically anything. For example, I need to. or I would like to. It's very simple from the beginning, but you can also, have sentence generators for advanced level learners that will help you to have a lot of scope in what you would like to express. So those sentence generators helped me a lot, and I also use them with my students to give them tools to express themselves and to say a lot of things, even if it's not exactly the way they want to say it, but it is a way to say it, and then later they can adjust it as they progress.
Now, I love what you say about sentence generators. I call them fluency phrases. And I mean, I
Mm,
talk about them a lot because they are such a powerful way of
yeah.
increasing fluency and also increasing your confidence. And as you say, you can use them in thousands of different situations. And because they're phrases rather than individual words, they also stop the hesitation, don't they? Because you're not trying to find okay, and now I need the verb, and that verb is need. Okay, what comes after need? It is an infinitive with to. So I need to, if you learn it as a phrase, then I need to do this, I need to go there, I need to leave now, and you can generate millions of sentences. They're super, super helpful. And I loved also what you said about using recordings and also using timers. And timers are something that I have used on a couple of occasions, and they're quite a challenge, aren't they? Because you think, how can I possibly tell the story again? But instead of 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and instead of 3 minutes, 2 minutes, it's quite a challenge. And
Mhm.
how do your students find that, Maurice?
So usually they like it a lot because of course, it goes along with a good amount of commendation, and you can do this because most of the time the reaction is, "Oh, I can do that."
Mm.
And now you can absolutely do that. And I cheat a little bit with that because when they really don't manage, like they don't see that I already stopped the timer. And so I give them an idea that they actually get very close to that, target time when they actually surpassed it by far. But it doesn't matter if they feel like, look, this is the time you managed to say this in. Oh wow, I think I can do it in 10, I can do 10 seconds faster. And so I use this in a fun way, and also with the young learners, making hilarious jokes also helps. It's like my first English teacher did. Like, okay, if you don't manage to do it within the 20 seconds, you're gonna lose a finger. Sorry, something like that. That helps a lot because it's like all wrapped up in the enjoyment package. It's not okay if you don't manage. It's not about actually making it in time. It's more about actually doing the exercise.
Yes. Yes, that's lovely. I really appreciate that it's not always about the result. It's about doing the work that may or may
Right.
not get to the result, but you have still done that practice. That's lovely. And yes, I think jokes, I mean, you're going to lose a finger. I mean, I think sometimes our superpowers as teachers are actually to make the atmosphere lighter, to tell
Yeah.
a joke, to make people laugh, because as soon as you laugh, you're
Mm.
relaxed. But that kind of brings me on to my next point, which is the point about feedback. Now, you've mentioned feedback a couple of times. Why don't you explain to us your theories behind feedback, what it's like as a learner to get feedback from a teacher, and how you use feedback as a teacher yourself with your students?
Mm. So this goes back all the way to my childhood because I was not the kind of learner that would just sit down and go ahead and do my homework. I was an outside boy. I grew up next to a nature reserve full of trees and woods, and that was a place that I loved to spend my whole day. I would play field hockey outside. I was a tennis player, doing everything outside. That was my thing. So, getting myself to sit down behind a desk and do my work. My parents were not the kind of parents that would actually, be so engaged in helping me to do that. So they sent me off to a high school in the end where there was a homework feedback system where you kind of were, under supervision of, the whole school system helping you with feedback to get it done. And then once you would be back home, you had nothing more to do. And so that was a feedback system that I started with, but it didn't really help me because it didn't engage me, it didn't motivate me, it wasn't personal, it was just a dry system that was established, but since it was nothing personal, it really didn't help me to actually, benefit from that kind of feedback. But later, even with my own language, Dutch, I was surrounded by friends, and one particular friend, he was an expert on Dutch, and he was constantly correcting me. He said, "No, you don't say it this way, you say it that way, or the sentence structure should be that way," or various things that he was constantly, bugging me with. But it made me increase on my language level and the quality of my speech. It helped a lot. And so that was when it kind of triggered me, and I started to understand that this is how feedback is supposed to be. It has to be honest, it has to be
Mm,
straightforward, um, not blunt, but straightforward.
mm,
And it has to be in a manageable dose. It has to be frequent, so that you're constantly working with that feedback. So it's something that you need to embrace. And so I had a thing about a system or people telling me, "Oh, you're doing great." But I knew I wasn't. For example, I was taking guitar lessons when I was a teenager, and my teacher would say, "Oh, you're doing great." But I knew I hadn't put forth any effort throughout the week. So his feedback was constructive and positive, and so to speak, but it wasn't actually really helping me to do the work and to be consistent in the work. It was just to please me, but it wasn't really to help me move forward. And so out of that feeling, I started to understand that feedback, it has to be more direct. It has to be it has to be specific, and it has to help you to grow towards your goal.
mm.
And so as a teacher, I started to do the same. Of course, you need to kill the apprehension and make people feel comfortable and the fun part and everything, but you also need to clearly show them, look, this is where you need to improve. Let's work on that. And so with my feedback task based program with voice chats, for example, my students, they send me their speaking task, and they get a very laser focused feedback back that helps them. Okay, this was going great, but there are a few things that I need to implement and improve that. And when they embrace that feedback idea and understand that this uncomfortableness, again, uncomfortable is good because it helps you to see in which areas you can grow. And it helps them to grow and progress much more quickly than if they would just like, get easy and do it their way and not be open to any kind of feedback at all. And so
Yeah,
I benefited from that personally, and I see how my students, if they embrace the idea, also have the same results.
yeah, no, I like what you're saying about the feedback has to be personal, and also that is the aim isn't to necessarily praise people, but to give them actionable tips for improvement. And this kind of leads me on to my next question, because I have asked people before about how they feel about getting feedback and how they feel
Mhm.
about correction. Because personally, as a teacher, I don't correct every mistake, but sometimes I think that my students want every mistake to be corrected. So, where do you stand on that, Maurice? Do you correct every mistake, or do you just choose a few mistakes to correct?
No, I'm on the same page with that. Feedback is good, but it has to be a measure of feedback that still makes the learner engaged and positive about him or herself. So, it's like a parent who is constantly correcting the child. The constant correction is not motivating, is not engaging, is not helping to actually want to make the next step. the apprehension is there all the time. So you have to manage the apprehension and keep it down. And so a good amount of commendation is important, like, hey, you're doing great, keep up the work. You're doing and being specific on what's going well. This is going well, that is going well. Nice, you're progressing in that regards. But think about this and think about that. Let's practice that. Let's work on that. You're gonna do even better than what you're doing now. I think that package of
Mm.
commendation and specific feedback is a combination that in general in life works with everything, right? If a person appreciates you in general in life, and you feel that and you recognize that there's this established report, and then you can also take anything that the person has to tell you that is maybe uncomfortable, but that needs to be adjusted. And I think with the scene of language learning, it is not different. I think it's the same.
Yes, I would say that in all areas of life, as you say, you're going to get
Hmm.
an area, a time of discomfort, of feeling uncomfortable when you're trying new things, when you're, stepping out of your comfort zone. But having this actionable thing, and I like the way that you say to your students, so let's think about these two things and let's practice them now, because the feedback then is practical and it's immediate, isn't it? Rather than it being sort of like, oh, this is something for you to work on in the future. Let's work on it now. And so, how do
Hmm.
you choose then the things to focus on, Maurice? I mean, do you look at just grammar? Do you look at pronunciation? Or do you look at a whole range of things, or even, just a limited number of things?
I think first I observe the learner. Usually, the learner for a little while, and I just observe and make notes and see and look for patterns.
Mm.
Because if there is a specific pattern in which the learner is making mistakes or finds it difficulties or has mannerisms developed in how she or he speaks the language, I think these patterns need to be polished out, and they're going to make a bigger difference in the actual performance of that learner in the language. So that is important. Another thing that I think is important is, what is the specific learning goal? What is the target? Like, is there a specific result we're working towards? So the feedback also is connected with that. Um, Also, the fact that I think I mentioned it before, language learning is platform growth. And this is how I experienced it myself. You're kind of struggling around on a certain platform level of your language understanding. And then suddenly, from one day to another, after putting forth the consistent work, just like it feels like you're alleviated, like it feels like, okay, it feels like I'm at the next level, and then you're gonna go through the same struggles again, and you want to be consistent, and then after a while, the next thing is gonna happen. You're gonna go to the next level, and and so understanding that as well helps me to identify, okay, where should I not give feedback now, because that struggle is just going to be that struggle. It's part of the learning process, so I don't need to constantly pick the details there, because it's just the process that the learner is embracing. And so you have to leave the student kind of in that struggle, because it's
Yeah.
going to help him or her to figure things out, because we have an amazing brain that is able to make the connections, and it's not only the teacher who has to make the connection. You have to help the learner connect with all of that and move forward. I think that is the more mature way to actually get to fluency, because you will be a more autonomous language
Mm.
speaker.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a case of meeting the student where they are there, rather than thinking, oh well, you're not using complex modals correctly, or you're not even using like the third person S correctly. If they're not at that stage that they are
Mm,
going to be able to use that anyway, it's kind of pointless giving them
yeah.
feedback or giving them correction, however you like to call it, because they're just not going to be ready to learn that or to acquire that knowledge. But as you say, at a certain point, there will be these moments of breakthrough. And it does sometimes feel like, yesterday and today, yesterday I was here, but today I'm here. You do get those moments of breakthrough. And I think those moments are not they're not immediate things, but the change has been happening for a while. But there is almost a day's difference, and certainly in
Right.
your performance, but also how you feel about the language. Yeah, these are very, very interesting comments you're making. And you also mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned something called neural pathways. Can you kind of define that and say what you mean about a neural pathway?
Absolutely. So when I talk about neural pathways, it is there's a difference in all the information you stack in your brain, all the grammar you're studying, all the things, all the words that you know, and actual the capacity to bring that to your mouth and actually communicate. And so when I was learning Spanish, I was in a group, I got in a group of 20 Spanish learners who had been studying for 2 years. And there was one particular individual who had difficulties to speak because he was afraid to make the mistakes. And he was not speaking and he wasn't progressing at all. And I was doing the contrary. I just got started, but within 2 months, I was far beyond where he was after 2 years of studying, because I thought that the concept of speak what you learn, start with little things, improvise with that, use that to give people everything you got when you start to communicate. That is how you establish those neural pathways, because it will help you to actually use your mouth to speak what you know, instead of just, filling up your brain
Mm.
with zero capacity to actually, start to engage with anyone. So I think this is extremely important. It is something what I went through with all the languages I learned, but also something that I, implemented in my teaching methods to help the learner do exactly that and feel the confidence. Okay, I knew little things, but I'm already starting to speak. When I have a one-on-one session with a student, I want the learner to get out of that session feeling like, hey, I'm
Mm.
talking,
Mm.
I'm saying things, even if it's a basic level, but still like I'm communicating, I'm
Yeah,
engaging in the target language. And I think this is extremely important,
yeah.
because that's what you want. You want to use your mouth to communicate with people.
It's also highly motivating, isn't it? If at the end of a lesson you can say something in English or whatever that
Mhm.
language is, that you're not just learning theory. And yes, thank you for explaining what you mean by neural pathways. It's like making that path between your passive knowledge and your active knowledge
Active knowledge.
yes, it's to
Mhm.
activate what you know or what you have learnt so that actually comes out of your mouth. And I think
Right.
you're touching on a point which is so important. We often feel that in order to progress with our English, we have to learn more. But then people also say, yes, but I know all these words, but they never come out. I can never remember them at the time that I need them. And this is a common problem. And I think, yes, if you're getting to use, as you say, speak what you know, and you're using immediately that new language, then you're helping to activate it. And I think that's such an important point. It's not learning a language is not a process of learning more, but it's a process of using what you have learnt. And I love what you're saying about, having a result at the end of a lesson, even at low levels, that you can say something, and even having a template, that I live in and my job is at a very basic level. It gives you such a sense of satisfaction, doesn't it, that you can come up with something in language.
Absolutely. And I also help my students, for example, to improvise on that. For example, if the student just learned, for example, in Dutch, I'm from Amsterdam. Um, so the learner only knows that sentence. But if I make a question without explaining how to make the question, or because we're in the context, the learner understands and
Mm.
also hears me say the question. So without me actually teaching anything, just saying it based on the simpleness of the sentence structure, but in a different way, the learner understands. And so has learned two things, has learned now to say, I am from Amsterdam, but also, are you from Amsterdam? And also, yes or no, I'm from Amsterdam. So take a look at all those lessons you're learning in this very compact time where, you know, that neural pathways involved, and that helps to actually learn a language quite fast. I'm amazed sometimes. Some of my students, they just got started and they're already engaged in
Mm.
simple conversations using 3, 4 verbs. It's awesome to see that happen. Yeah.
You know, I wish I had had you as my Dutch teacher when
Thank
I
you.
lived in the Netherlands. Because as you were talking about it, I was thinking, I think I can remember how to say where I live in Dutch, but the question eluded me. But no, I
Mm,
found learning Dutch quite a tricky thing, and I have to say
yeah.
I wasn't very successful at it. But I think if I'd had such an active lesson where I'm learning, as you say, not just the statement form, but also the question, and I'm repeating it enough, then these things tend to stick in your brain. Yes, thank you so much, Maurice. Now, if people want to know more about you, and if they want to know more about your voice chat programs, how can they contact you, Maurice?
So I believe in the more information section, there's a link towards my green Google form where people are interested in events, because I organize live events and live meetings each month where they can learn more about this method that I use to help to get towards more fluency with English. They can sign up for that. I can inform them about it, and they will have the experience to see how it works by themselves. And they can also find me through LinkedIn on my profile to find more information about that. So it will be easy to catch me there.
Fabulous. So I will put the link to your Google forms and to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So if anybody would like to experience Maurice's sense of humor, I promise you he will not remove your fingers. At least I hope you won't remove people's fingers, but at least they will experience your sense of humor, but more importantly, how you use feedback to help people actively learn English. Maurice, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It was such a pleasure to hear about your fluency techniques, and I'm sure it will be very inspiring to people listening. Thank you so much, Maurice.
Thank you, Claire. I love to be on and to have this conversation with you.